Linda, tell me about, as you were saying, our careers really started to intersect through HIV and AIDS. We were first brought together by a panel that Sarah Schulman was doing. And at that time, your landmark essay or cover story for the New York Times Magazine hadn't come out yet, which was really going to help reframe and put back on the map the ongoing crisis that's happening until that CDC statistic came out and the way that that 1 in 2 Black men who have sex with men are projected to become HIV positive, and the way that you so eloquently put it, that if Black men who have sex with men were a country, it would have the highest rate of any country on earth. And after that moment, I think that there did start to be more notice being taken to this ongoing crisis, which had been incorrectly framed as being in the past. So, can you tell me about how did your coverage first begin on HIV and AIDS, and why did it speak to you? Why did it become something that you ended up spending a good part of your career writing about?
Well, in 1987, I wasn't even on staff at Essence yet. I was just a young reporter trying to get in. And the editor in chief called me and she said, I have a story for you to do about this strange new disease. And so she had me at, I have a story for you. And so I ended up reporting it. And I guess GMHC was the connection to me to get to people to interview. So first I was like, why is Essence Magazine a magazine for Black women? Why is the gay men's health crisis our contact? Is this a disease that somehow I just didn't even understand? Why am I working with a disease called GRID for Black women if it's about gay? And once I understood what it was, I was like, this is a gay white men's disease, because that was the narrative then. So I ended up interviewing this woman in the Bronx who had become infected with this strange new disease, she and her baby. She was so weak, she couldn't hold the phone. She was so weak, she could hardly hold the baby. So I held the baby while she talked to me. And I looked at the baby and the baby her mouth was white because I later found out she had thrush. And by the time the article came out, which was 1987, the woman and her baby had died. And so I realized, oh, this is a disease that I'm very interested in covering. It hurts Black women, it hurts poor women, it hurts women in New York City. So the next time I did it, I was at the New York Times newspaper, and I did a cover story about high death rates among Black people. And this was after 1996, where there was treatment for it, but Black people now had the highest death rate. And it was also striking African-American straight women, mainly, among women, straight women, Black women. And so this was really scary. But at each intersection, I kept thinking, well, this will be the last time I cover this, because certainly there will be something that changes this trajectory, what's happening. And then in 2017, the cover story in the New York Times Magazine that you talked about, it was really about Black, gay, and bisexual men in the South who had been left behind by all the communities that should have worked to help them. And that really struck me, that it was like, wait, I was writing about this in 1987. Why in 2017 am I still covering this? Why didn't anything happen? Given two communities which were working really hard to make changes, and they did, what happened to leave behind Black, gay, and bisexual men, specifically in the South? So that, and it's still going on, which is alarming and angering.
I have two questions about that. One is, prior to reporting that, you were, a queer person yourself. Did you already know people outside of writing about it in your life? Did you already know people who were affected by AIDS?
I did. I did know people who were affected by AIDS, and it was a lot of Black gay men. And so I knew that was going on. Many of my sources were Black gay men inside the government, at nonprofit organizations, at the Black AIDS Institute. And it's interesting because those that survived, many of them are still doing work. Greg Millett, I'm sure you know him. He was, back in the day, he was on the White House AIDS task force. He just came out with a very interesting study that had a bunch of both gay LGBTQ people plus Black queer people who were the scientists behind the numbers about COVID. Came out through AMFAR. The question would be, why is an AIDS research organization releasing statistics about AMFAR in communities of color? It's because there are so many people behind the scenes that were working in earlier in HIV/AIDS research and activism and government agencies that are still out there that are experts in infectious diseases right now and that can speak so fluently and literally about COVID.
Yeah, Greg's work, the AmFAR map, their interactive map that I've looked at, shows all these different factors you can look at around a variety of diseases, not just HIV and AIDS, but of course, when you start looking at the maps, you start seeing they're the same maps, and I'm sure the same is true with COVID. The other question I wanted to ask you about the time, there's 20 years between your first story and the Times cover story, magazine cover story, was there progress around Black women who you were first writing about?
Well, what was interesting was the Black community came together in the 2000s to really deal with the issue of Black women. Among women, Black women were many times more likely to both be infected with HIV/AIDS and die from it compared to all women. And so the Black community put out a call to action. These were women in the reproductive years. It was in, churches came, talked about HIV/AIDS. I was in an HIV/AIDS seminar, and I'm sitting next to this woman thinking, oh, she looks kind of churchy. She turned to me and she said, I'm the first lady of a church. There have been so many people, especially Black women in my church, who have gotten infected or died of HIV/AIDS. I'm terrified. I need to come and learn about this disease. And so, politicians came out. There became organizations specifically targeting Black people around HIV/AIDS. And so it was a call to action in the community, and it worked. The raw numbers of Black women who got infected with HIV/AIDS and died dropped. At the same time, the number of Black gay and bisexual men rose. And so that was the terrible thing, is that once again, Black gay and bisexual men, particularly in the South, were left behind.
Wow. And for people who haven't read the story, if you can answer it briefly, why did the Black gay men get left behind?
It's just the communities that should have been working with them. The gay community, which is the people that are most powerful in the gay community, are white gay men, and they got it's discrimination. So Black gay men were left behind, and in the Black community, if all the energy is to help and save straight women, then Black gay men were left behind. And so these are two communities that should have done much more. But now, I think many of us have covered this. You too have covered these issues around criminalization and other things around Black gay, the Black HIV/AIDS crisis that continues. And I think many of us are trying to change things and to try to at least illuminate what's going on, to say, wait a minute, we cannot turn our backs on these men.
Linda, I only recently found out that you were a founding board member of NLGGA, the National Gay and Lesbian Journalists Association, which is also now called the Journalists Association for LGBTQ people. And wanted to, tell us about what that was like coming together. And also, were you, as you were at Essence at the time, I think, were there other queer people that were out? Did you have other queer colleagues, or were you kind of the only one in your shop that was signing on to this new organization?
So in 1991, for Mother's Day, my mother and I co-authored a story of our coming out story. So it was about me coming out as a lesbian in college to my mother, who didn't take it very well. And then my mother coming to grips over years of having a lesbian daughter. And so that was the main article in May 1991. And for many years, it was the most responded to article in the history of Essence. There were two follow-ups. There was a follow-up one I did with my two children and my mother. And so that was a big deal. So once I did that, and I became this kind of Black lesbian poster child who was also a journalist at Essence, I became much more visible. And Roy Aarons, the founder of the National Lesbian and Gay Journalists Association, came to me and he said, I want to put you on my board of this new organization that I'm starting for lesbian and gay journalists. And I want you and Andrew Sullivan to be the keynote speakers at our first convention in 1992. So we did that. Michelangelo Signorelli was also one of the main speakers. Randy Schiltz was one of the main speakers. And it was a really important, vibrant time. And so much of that time was about coming out, just coming out in the newsroom. That's what our organization was about. That was most of it. It was also about networking, but coming out was the big thing. And it was important to support people and nurture them as they came out in their newsrooms so they could be more comfortable covering the issues that were most important to us. So that was a crazy time. Were you involved with the National Lesbian Gay Journalists Association?
Yeah, I'm a member. My sort of my bleak humorous story I tell about it is I won their Journalist of the Year award, and then I got laid off 2 weeks later by the Village Voice. So I didn't get to enjoy the award for that long. But it's a really important organization, and it was interesting that and this I think ties to some of the conflict you've told me about in your career too. But the year that I won that award, it was part of Unity for the first time, and Unity had been the National Association of Black Journalists, Hispanic journalists, Native American journalists, I think also Asian American journalists. And
Yeah.
then Unity joined, and then NLGJ joined for the first time. And so then they took journalists of color off the name, and that was um, really contentious. And then, but also NLGJ was being pushed to change their name to include bisexual, queer, and transgender people, and they didn't want to change their name. So that was some of that convention. But it was really amazing at that huge convention with all these people to see that there was all this overlap between NLGGA and NABJ and the other organizations. And by the time I was working in media myself, I didn't find that many challenges about being gay. I think I've kind of systemically, I think, found and observed more about being Black, and that brings us a bit to the moment, the reckoning that Black journalists are leading. But I did want to ask you, when you were in the beginning of your career and when you were starting, when you were on that board of NLGJ, did you find that there was a real dichotomy between white identity with queerness and Black identity, including or not including queerness? Did you find that these things were in opposite, even though they're true? And we know, of course, that people have these multiple identities, but writ large, when you were at the beginning of your career, were queer spaces open to Black people, and were Black spaces open to queer people in terms of journalism, professional associations and whatnot?
Well, I think what's very interesting is how it harkens back to now, where people like you and me, and many of us are running around trying to do panels and Zoom calls and to sort of talk about some of these issues. And back then, there were so few of us who were Black in these queer spaces. I mean, I'm thinking of Marcus Mabry was one of the few. He was at Newsweek, and Jonathan Capehart, who was at the Daily News on the editorial board. And they were just, all of us were trying to run around and be the diversity in some of these spaces. Michelle Johnson, who was at the Boston Globe. And it was very hard. And it was also hard to gain a toehold, because often, even in these sort of well-meaning queer spaces in the 90s, where all of us were doing something radical, it was hard to get some of the white gay men to say, to let us in, to be on the planning committee, not just come in at the end to say, oh, we're not all gay white men. And so it was really difficult. And, I'm sorry that that's less now, but it still goes on. And it made it hard. And it was also, I think at that time, I'm very interested in what Black journalists are doing right now as activists almost, to say there's so much more voice that we have. I'm at the New York Times Magazine. I am allowed to speak in a voice. I don't like first person, but I can be in first person. I can speak more, not trying to sound like a cardboard cutout of objectivity anymore. We can have our voices in a way that we couldn't in the past. We had a huge debate about whether it was okay for us to march in the Gay Pride Parade as the National Lesbian Gay Journalists Association. So some people were marching like this with a sweatshirt on. I had a T-shirt that had, I should go get it, it's in my drawer over there, that says, we're here, we're queer, we're on deadline. So that was our motto. And but it was a big debate about whether we should be doing that at all, because it seemed like we weren't being objective. So finally, at the end, or whether we should be involved in AIDS activism. I did not join ACT UP because of that. It was hard to be in a HIV/AIDS march at the time. And finally, I said, "Are there two sides to this? Is there anybody who likes HIV/AIDS? I mean, who wants it to go? I don't understand why we're being so scorched earth about this." So I think just the times were different then.
Yeah, I remember you and I both marched together with Gays Without Guns right after Orlando, and there were so many people there from that I deeply respected, admired, and loved. Kendall Thomas, the critical race theorist, lots of other journalists, that we know. And it was right after Orlando. I had just flown to Orlando, and I had woken. I actually was awake when the Orlando shooting was happening. I just was coming home from the party, and I saw on Twitter something was happening, and then I ended up finding out that it was at a gay club. I was writing for The Guardian at the time, and I got in touch with an editor in Australia because we had editors in New York, London, and Australia. So I found an editor in Australia and said, "This is what's happening." And she put me on a news story right away. And then they had me write an opinion story. I was technically an opinion columnist, but I wrote an opinion piece right then. And then I didn't even go to bed. They told me to go to the airport and fly down there. And so I'd spent that week in Orlando. And for me, that was a really reflective time. I stayed in a gay motel, the Parliament House, and 15 people who had worked there had died at the Pulse shooting, and everyone who was alive still, they all knew many people who died. And then they had all these different ethnic nights. As you probably remember, that Pulse happened on Latin night, because a lot of stuff was segregated. The hip hop night was at the Parliament House, but it didn't start until like 2 a.m. Because many of the people who work at these, who go to these parties, and many of the people who died at Pulse, they're service workers around the Disney economy. So they put everyone to bed, and their jobs at hotels and restaurants, and then they go out very late at night. And for me, that was a real turning point for me in understanding subjectivity and objectivity, that I was able to report about people who actually knew the people who died, not by standing outside the crime scene, with the satellite trucks, but actually by staying in this hotel, which was this extremely queer space. There were sex workers, there was drug sales, there was these parties that happened. But it was of course really meaningful and wonderful, and I think made my journalism richer for it. And to me, one of the things that I've taken from editors I work for is that it's okay to have points of view. You have to be honest with your readers. Like, if I just tell them, this is where I'm at, I'm a gay man staying in a gay hotel, and this is what's happening, and here's the world that you're going to get to come into with me, which you wouldn't even know about as a straight person. You wouldn't know to go to hip hop night at 2 a.m. in this hotel. But it's really helped me think about, how our work can be richer when we acknowledge, the parts of ourselves that make us whole people. And I'm curious, if for you, being at the Times, there's been such a reckoning in the Times, starting with the Tom Cotton op-ed, and the writers really standing in solidarity, and then this beautiful Wesley Morris op-ed that just came out a couple of days ago about what it means to understand you can still be a good journalist and not and participate in, as you said, something like HIV/AIDS. Nobody should want anyone to be suffering from HIV/AIDS, and yet somehow journalism has built up in a way that if you feel a nerd from it, or don't feel like it could threaten you, and don't feel like you ever have to say anything about it, that will advance your career more than if you are someone who says, I also recognize that I want to have a job as a journalist, and I don't want to die from AIDS, and I want the same civil rights as everyone else. But that should be okay as part of being a journalist, to acknowledge those parts of yourselves.
It was interesting because just before that whole Tom Cotton thing blew up at the Times, the magazine where I am a contributor but don't work full time invited me to a staff meeting to talk about how I did my reporting for my COVID cover story, A Terrible Price, which was about COVID in Black communities. And I did it really fast. In 3 weeks, it was all over the phone. And so sort of the idea was, how did you do that? What kind of secret did you have? What did you do? And the only secret I had was I have experience doing that. I have contacts. I am Black, so I have reported in the Black community in New Orleans before. I've reported among, my sources are Black physicians and scientists or people who in public health who cover racial health disparities. So it was very easy to get in and go fast and to gain trust very quickly. And the same with my HIV/AIDS reporting. It's like, if I've been doing that, you were very kind to say it was 20 years. It was actually 30 years between those two stories. And so, but if I've been doing this for 30 years, I have many of the same contacts, it's easier to ignite them again. It's easier than someone else who's going in cold. So it's unfair actually and wrong to say, well, you shouldn't be so enmeshed. The reason I pitch these stories that I pitched to the Times Magazine are because I know about them. I care deeply. And with HIV/AIDS, I think I had a certain amount of anger and maybe a little bit of guilt that I hadn't done enough, because I'm saying, wait, why after 30 years is this still happening? Why after 20 years, when I had done another story 20 years ago for the Times newspaper, why is this still happening? I'm not doing enough. We have passion for these stories. We care. They're about the communities where we live. And so I think that everything that's going on confirms what I have felt for many years as a Black queer journalist, that, I want to cover these stories. And also, I think when I'm told that, oh, you're not being objective because you're covering these communities you know about, I was like, well, if I'm not doing them, nobody else is. It's not like there's people running out to say, oh, I'm pitching and doing a story on Black queer men in the South who have HIV/AIDS and many of them are largely very poor. And so, these are stories that I care about and that I, want to be there. I want to be the one that does the story and that speaks to the people and that finds the people. So, I think that's important to say about our work as Black queer journalists. And, I love that there are many of us now. Like, I'm thinking of Wesley Morris and Jenna Wortham, my colleagues at the Times Magazine. I'm thinking about Kai Wright, who is at WNYC. I'm thinking about the many Black queer, you, for goodness sake, are such a wonderful journalist. And so, the work you're doing is so important and intersectional. But, there are many of us who are often leading the way in some of these discussions, especially right now.
One last question I have is, what does it mean to you, having done this work for a while now, to see that this phrase Black Lives Matter, which has just ignited the world, and it's taken a few years to truly ignite the world, but almost every continent it seems to have touched right now, comes from this group of 3 Black women. Some, if not all, identify as LGBTQ in some way. What does that mean to you, to think that this has come from our community, and that at the Brooklyn Museum, not far from where we are right now, that there were 15,000 people out for Black trans lives, and that has become such a force in the culture, not just for getting coverage and the kind of stories that we care about, but also to demand and create space for a different understanding of Black life in the world.
I am so excited that Black Lives Matter, started as a hashtag. 3 Black women, I think 2 of them are identify as queer. I'm really proud of that and really excited that it's caught on. And I never thought it would, to be honest, in my lifetime. This is the most momentum moment in my lifetime. It's also the most momentum moment. One of the most momentum moments in my whole career. And I feel like I was ready to be on the ground, be a reporter right now, be a writer. I'm saddened by what's happening. I'm scared by what's happening. What's happening makes me tired, but it's also energizing. I'm happy to contribute, to be part of the conversation and to be part of the change. I also am glad that Black trans lives have finally been, there's marches for that. For Black trans women mainly. And I think of all the communities that have been left behind, Black trans women are the ones that have been the most left behind. They're the ones with the highest per capita HIV/AIDS rates and death rates. They're the ones who are subject to the most violence. They're subject to police violence, which is rarely spoken about. Sometimes they get the double harassment when something happens to them. as a crime, and then they're doubly harassed, ignored, their gender identity erased by law enforcement. And so this is a really good time, and I hope it sticks. I hope we really do not forget the T in LGBTQ, which has happened in the past. And I find this thrilling in the most tragic way. And it's taken way too long, but I'm glad this moment has happened and this reckoning has happened.
Well, thank you, Linda. On this Pride and the occasion of this march, I just want to thank you so much for your work over the decades, one more than my math counted for. And thank you so much for just everything that you've contributed to making Black Lives Matter and Black HIV positive lives matter and Black HIV positive women's lives matter. And also for your endless generosity to other Black and or queer journalists like myself, and to your students at City College. You're a real inspiration to me and to many, and we all thank you for your work and wish you and yours a beautiful Pride, and hope that you get to enjoy the fruits of this burgeoning movement, which you have been so important to helping tell the stories of and create the space for.
And I want to say to you, thank you for your work. Thank you for your work as a scholar, a teacher. I'm very excited to be part of your Dr. Thrasher PhD crew. And I'm really proud of you. I don't always think of us in different generations because I consider you a friend, but I'm glad to have had a role in supporting you, nurturing you, and other journalists who have come behind me, and those who are still coming. I'm still there, and want to say that it's an important time to be a journalist. It's an important time to be a Black journalist. It's an important time to be a queer journalist, and I'm glad to be in this moment and to do what I can to support other Black queer journalists and other journalists in general.